Good afternoon, everybody. I am Panos Mitru from Lloyd's Register. I'm the gas segment manager for Lloyd's Register, and I will be moderating a session on the green future of shipping, the future of green shipping. So today with us we have Arthur Richier, a senior freight analyst from Vortexa, and Charlotte Bucchioni from S&P Global Platts, who will elaborate on the subject. We will then have the chance to discuss on some key topics regarding the future of green shipping, having decarbonization under the spotlight. So we will now start with Arthur. So Arthur will be presenting on the green future of shipping and what shipping will look like in the decades to come. So Arthur, the floor is yours.
Cheers, Panos, for the introduction. So my name is Arthur and I'm a senior freight analyst at Vortexa, and I'm very excited to kickstart this panel on the future of green shipping. First of all, let's take a look at the agenda. I'm going to start by introducing Vortexa, and then I'll remind the audience of the IMO goals that the shipping industry is facing when it comes to decarbonization. We'll then take a look at two case studies in order to highlight the challenges and potential solutions available to our shipping market participants. And then we'll conclude the presentation. So a short introduction to Vortexa. We're an analytics provider for the oil and gas industry that produces real-time global detail waterborne cargo flows. And by blending our AI-driven models as well as human intelligence from our market analysts, we're able to provide you with the most complete set of energy waterborne cargo movements in the industry today. And we're used by a number of players in the industry to that effect, to get a forward-looking market view. So you'll see examples of our data throughout the presentation. But let's look at the decarbonization of shipping. So small reminder, on the left-hand side, you'll have the goals that the IMO has set for the shipping industry. Now, these include a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 50% by 2050, as well as a reduction of carbon intensity of those same emissions, respectively by 40 and 70% for 2030 and 2050. Now, that compares to 2008 levels. These goals are ambitious, but ambition is what you need when tackling a problem of this scale. So what must the industry aim for? Well, it needs to be aligned when it comes to global regulations. And as I'm sure many policymakers in this virtual conference with us today would agree that it's something that's really not easy to do. If we look at the scrubbers, for example, some ports have banned them, others haven't. It lacks an industry coordination there. We're really going to have to focus on cross-sector research and development. And that means the industry committing all across the supply chain. Whatever solution is needed, we're going to have to scale up the fuel production if an alternative fuel is the way to go, and then match that by scaling up the bunkering infrastructure. There was a very comprehensive report by Shell that came out, which estimated the total cost of the decarbonization of shipping by 1.65 trillion by 2050. So by no means are these small numbers. Let's now look at the challenges that are really specific to the shipping industry. Well, it's a very capital intensive industry. You're looking at upwards of $100 million for a new build, very large crude carrier. These vessels trade for 20 to 30 years. Change is very slow to enact, and it's not easy to change the ones already on the water. Right now, bunker fuels, in other words, polluting fuels, are the industry standard, and there isn't a clear-cut alternative. So there are some alternatives, which we'll look at later. And the global industry lacks that global coordination and infrastructure. So some of the solutions that have been proposed that we are aware of, that we're looking into. We have the scrubbers. Now, scrubbers came in as a response to the IMO 2020 regulations that made the industry move and switch towards fuels with a lower sulfur content. As we'll see, it's maybe too little too late. The majority of the fleet hasn't decided to adopt that option. And actually, we now know that you still emit more greenhouse gases with a lower sulfur fuel than with a higher sulfur fuel with a scrubber. So this, whether that has worked or not, whether this is the long-term solution, probably not. When it comes to alternative shipping fuels, it begs the questions of their availability. Are we producing enough of them? Is it worth really pushing forwards in order to produce more? Considering that is also going to put a strain on our resources and necessitate a tremendous amount of investment. The International Chamber of Shipping has looked into a research and development fund for the industry and is trying to raise $5 billion. Now, if we looked at the previous estimate, which is 33 times that amount, are we committing enough funds to this? And once more, we need to put really the focus on the fact the industry has to be united in order to tackle this. So let's look at our first case study. At Vortexa here, we track the global tanker fleet with regards to oil and gas carriers. On the right-hand side here, you have a screenshot of our map screen within our Vortexa software. So we track today about 11,000 vessels. Now, keep in mind, these are only oil and gas carriers. You have about roughly the same amount in terms of dry bulk carriers, and maybe 20 to 25,000 other vessels. In these, you have your container ships, your cruise liners, your general cargo ships, etc. Now, if we look on the left-hand side, I want to bring your attention to two data sets. The first one concerns the scrubber non-scrubber split. As you can see, only 9% of the fleet is equipped with scrubbers. The recent pandemic has actually kind of put a halt to these scrubber installations. So that's not going to increase in the near term. When it comes to the second point, and that's one I really want to bring your attention to, it's the age profile of this global fleet. Now, if you consider the trading, active trading period of these vessels to be around 20 years, well, by 2030, we'll have potentially 55% of these vessels are going to be replaced. And by 2050, we can imagine that none of the tankers we see today might still be operating then, once more if we use that 20-year as a baseline. And maybe here we need to take a step back actually from the entire industry and ask yourselves this: what is the commodity of the future? What is the energy commodity of the future that's going to be transported by 2050? Well, it's probably not going to be crude oil. And if it is, it probably won't be in the measures that we see today. Whether it'll be hydrogen, LNG, this is open for debate, but maybe the solution to the decarbonization of shipping goes through the extinction of the current crude and refined product carrier fleets. Let's take a look at LNG Field Tankers. Personally, I'm a big fan of them. I think whereas not a final solution, it can really help be a transitional solution. For example, there's great partnerships in the industry between, for example, the aforementioned Shell and a Russian carrier called Sovcomflot. So here you can see one of the LNG fueled Aframax tankers. In this case, in the case of LNG, it would be easier to develop a global bunkering infrastructure, as you can latch on those that infrastructure to existing LNG terminal facilities. And let's keep in mind that even though gas is a fossil fuel, it emits a lot less than the heavy bunker fuels currently used in the industry. So it would help towards the progression of our goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, when it comes to alternative fuels, the question is, do we have enough available? Currently, the industry standard is fuel oil. At Vortexa here, we track the cargo flows data for in-transit volume on a barrels per day basis. As you can see, LNG has really started in the last 3 years to be produced at a scale where there is now more of it on the water than fuel oil, which would fit kind of one of our first criteria for alternative fuels, which is its availability. And really, since the beginning of the year, probably supported by the current pandemic and the kind of destruction of demand, LNG is now firmly one step ahead of fuel oil when it comes to these volumes. That's not to say you don't have any other options, such as ammonia, methanol, or hydrogen as well, which is really being touted as the fuel of the future, which is really great because it can also be used from carbon capture. So that's something we can discuss as well. Ammonia global production levels are still very low compared to the tons of fuel oil discharge, but that also would be an option as it is a carbon neutral fuel. Now, what are the limitations? Well, low energy density for a lot of the above, meaning you would have to carry a lot more to have the same energetic output compared to fuel. We've previously mentioned the lack of infrastructure and the availability, and also storage and safety requirements. No one would want to repeat of the disaster that struck Lebanon earlier this year. And unfortunately, we have to be a lot more careful with some of these options than the previous ones. So what's our verdict? Well, the industry is ready, sort of. There is market demand. You do have regulatory incentives, and we have the technological capability. This is a quote from the aforementioned Shell report from a shipping operator that says, "We can build rockets that come back from the moon, but not make ships green." And maybe scientists should stop focusing on making square watermelons and instead of really looking to solving some of the climate challenges we have today. Because today as well, the reality is that we don't have a clear alignment on solutions. It's going to be very difficult to replace all these assets and to create that infrastructure. And also, ultimately, the question is who is going to foot the bill, meaning who is going to pay for all of this. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions or would like to reach out and discuss some of these points further, I'm happily available. So here's my email. Or if you'd like to request a demo as well of the Vortexa platform and the associated data, don't hesitate as well to send me an email. Thank you for listening.